The Narrative Inquiry Story by Hortensia Norton, created for our class Introduction to Education Research through the University of Alberta. I'm going to begin with a quote from Todd Hanson, the host of Story Trek. Story Trek is a TV show dedicated to finding and sharing people's stories across America. Everyone has something important to say. You see, I believe it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, you matter. I ask the simple question, what's your story? I love reading, listening to, watching, and telling stories, so I was very excited to find a research method that was all about stories. Narrative inquiry can be traced back to Aristotle and Augustine, but for our purposes, I'm going to look at the 20th and 21st century, where it's been used by many researchers in the social sciences. But in every article where you study narrative inquiry in education, you will come across two names, Connolly and Cladden. Michael Connolly is a professor at the University of Toronto, and Jean Cladden is a professor at the University of Alberta, and they're strongly influenced by the philosophers Paul Rigaud, John Dewey, Mark Johnson, Alistair MacIntyre, Edward Brunner, and Donald Polkinghorne. When Cladden started to use narrative inquiry in her research, she was just trying to understand people's experiences. She wasn't trying to become a research methodologist. But that's what she became with Michael Connolly when they began to write articles and books on the use of narrative research in education and other fields. In an interview she gave in September 2012 at the University of Manchester, Cladden provided a great overview of narrative inquiry. People live stories and they tell stories. When we recount our experiences, we are telling a story. We are living out our stories and we're telling stories of our lives. Narrative researchers try to get into the lives of those they research. They spend time together listening to their stories, watching what they do in order to get a feel for their lives. The intention is to understand why people do things they do, which Cladden feels that the understanding is often what's missed in research. The key characteristics to narrative design start with focusing on individual experiences and how their past experiences influence their current and future experiences. The narrative is done in chronological order. It would be near impossible to gather all the data in that order, but the end result is chronological. The researcher will potentially collect many forms of data, so they need to take all the pieces and create it in a narrative form. This includes a storyline, beginning, middle, end, setting, characters, actions, problems, and resolutions. The researcher will try to identify different themes in the participant's story. This could prove to be very beneficial to the participant, as they probably have not looked at their life through the lens of a theme. They may see patterns in their lives that they haven't seen before. The researcher also places the story in its proper time and place in the history of the participant's life. So, steps for the narrative research process I'm going to go through using my research question from our abstract assignment. So my concern was that my students in my library were being disadvantaged by using the Dewey Decimal System. So I would select a librarian from a school, potentially one in the States, who created the Matisse Library Classification System, who could tell me why she made the change. I would collect data by going through and having interviews, reading articles, webinars that they've written, and spending time with her. Then I would retell her story by putting all the pieces together from the data I'd gathered. Once that was together, I would take it to the librarian and have her fill in the gaps, which is collaborating, which number 5 picture indicates there. Then, all along the way, I would find ways to validate her story, talk to other librarians, read the articles written on the system. Once I have her consent, I would write the narrative of her experiences of creating this new library classification system and hopefully share it with others. Collaboration is a major part of narrative inquiry. Cladden advises researchers that if you aren't willing to form relationships with their participants, then narrative research isn't for you. Participants will not share their heartfelt stories if trust is not there. They are being in a vulnerable position by sharing their stories. So this leads to ethics. There's always the question that the story that someone is telling isn't true. Can you validate it, or can the story ever be validated? Another concern is that participants may want their story to be shared at the end, and do they have the right to end the project? Time for change. So people may feel like they want to tell their story because they feel that there's time for a change. So they're motivated because they feel they have a story to tell. Then one article is discussing that maybe narratives could be told in ways other than just written, that they could be sculptured or put pieces of art or many other forms. So our last thing is lives can be understood, revealed, and transformed in stories and by the very act of storytelling. And that just connects to the story at the end of, or in our textbook, of the student from China who came, and initially she just wanted to go back to China to, and get a good job. And in the end, she realized she wanted to do more than that. And that was through telling her story to the researcher. And I'm 14 seconds over, so that's it.